Hello, hello, and welcome back. Last time we met, we were talking about the negative effects that industrialization had on America throughout the late 1800s to the early 1900s. We were talking about how a lot of children were working for businesses and in textile factories and in coal mines throughout the late 1800s and early 1900s, and how that had a really negative impact on their development. Right? Sometimes they were working in unsafe conditions in textile mills and in coal mines, and they're working for really low wages. And where should they be? They should be in school learning and preparing for success in their future. And a lot of these businesses and factories, they have unsafe working conditions to begin with. Right? We talked about how many of them didn't have fire evacuation plans in the event that their factory or the business's building caught on fire. And a lot of workers are working for low wages. Right? They're working for far lower wages than their business owner or factory owner could actually afford to pay them. Okay? And in many cases, these children, these men and women working throughout America, they're working very long hours, right? Over 40, 50, 60-hour work weeks in some cases for a very low wage. So today we're going to talk about how America begins to realize some of these problems, okay? And workers begin to realize that they're in unsafe working environments, that their employer can afford to pay them more money, okay? So they're going to begin to organize into what we call labor unions, okay? But before we talk about labor unions and what they are, there are some other negative effects of industrialization that we need to discuss. Okay. So we've talked about how all these factories emerge in the major cities of America. Well, it's good that they're supplying people with jobs and businesses are making a lot of money, right? Those are the benefits of these factories, but there also are a lot of negative effects. Okay. Aside from children working within these factories, the owners paying their workers low wages, the owners making their workers work long hours, and all the unsafe conditions in some of these work environments. Okay, another major negative impact is that these factories are letting out smoke and toxic emission. Okay, and a lot of these factories are also transporting their finished products along the railroad, the steamboat, and via truck to their destination to be sold. Those trains, those steamboats, those trucks, they're all letting off smoke and toxic gas emission that has a damaging effect on our environment. Okay. And we talked about the several monopolies that gain control of the complete supply of a product or a service. Well, it's good that they're growing. It's good that they're providing people with jobs, those big companies and those big businesses that emerge. But the bad thing is when a business has total control over supplying a product or service, it can afford to charge its customers as much as it wants for their product or service. So that's a main reason why monopolies are seen as a bad thing. Okay. Besides pricing, monopolies also control the quality of their product. Okay. So if there are no competitors, then somebody like John Rockefeller can afford to let the quality of his oil slip or not be as good. Okay. Because people are still going to buy it because he's the main supplier of oil in the United States, right? He controls, at one point in the late 1800s, 90% of the United States' oil. Okay. So because he controls that, he decides what price oil is sold for and the quality of it. Okay. He has no competitors. He has nobody up against him that's willing to sell their oil for a lower price, is willing to sell their oil for a better quality. right? He controls a majority of that product, the market for that product, per se. Okay. So let's talk about some of the specific dangerous conditions in these factories that emerge and what they lead to. So the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire was an event that happened due to a textile factory in New York City not having a fire evacuation plan for its workers. Okay. The textile factory caught on fire. Women had no way out, had no idea how to escape the building safely. So what happened was many of them died. And this event caught national attention. Okay. There are a lot of journalists who are known as muckrakers, and these muckrakers, they're part of the progressive movement we've been talking about. They're going to bring into light all the issues in America, like child labor. So Lewis Hines considered a muckraker, right? And the muckraker journalists at this time, they're gonna get their hands on this event, right? They're gonna be made aware of this event, and they're gonna make sure everyone else knows why it happened, and that if these factory workers knew of a safe evacuation plan, how the whole event could have been prevented from happening, and hundreds of lives could have been saved as a result. Okay. And then, as a result, we also have some workers realizing that their employers could afford to pay them higher wages. Okay. They realized that their employers could be placing them in safer working conditions, so their jobs weren't as dangerous. Okay. So what do? They begin to organize into labor unions. Okay. Labor unions consist of groups of workers who organize to fight for things like higher wages, shorter hours of work, safer working conditions. Okay. And one of the first labor unions to emerge in the United States was the American Federation of Labor, also known as the AFL. It was founded by Samuel Gompers, who was a cigar maker, in 1886. So the AFL is going to consist of a large group of skilled workers who form unions made up of carpenters, bricklayers, plumbers, cigar makers, and a bunch of other skilled professions. Okay. The AFL is not going to contain any unskilled workers. So that means your street cleaners and your field workers on farms. They're not going to be part of the AFL. They're not going to be welcome to join the AFL, actually. And the main goals of the AFL were to reject the general welfare reform. Okay, they were specifically fighting for better working conditions, better wages, shorter working hours, and other benefits like health care in their professions. Okay. So they didn't care much about things like the temperance movement, which was trying to ban the sale of alcohol in the United States. Okay. They're not going to let African Americans join their unions. Okay. And they're not going to let women join their unions. So the AFL mainly includes white males. Okay. And they're going to concentrate on practical issues like higher wages, like I was saying, shorter hours, better working conditions, the right to organize and bargain for contracts and wages for jobs. And they want to restrict immigration. So they're not having to compete with all these immigrants that are coming into the United States willing to work for a lower wage than what they think is a fair one. So here you see a comic. Not all workers were part of these unions fighting for better working conditions, but anytime better working conditions were achieved, those workers that weren't actively fighting for those conditions benefited from all the workers that were. So that's why you see this guy kind of being carried by the worker who's part of the union fighting for better conditions. Okay. And when asked what Samuel Gompers, the founder of the AFL, wanted by a newspaper, Gompers said more. He wants more. And what does he mean by more? He means more money, more free time, okay? Safer working conditions, so more safer working environments. Right, those are the key things he's fighting for. And as workers begin to unionize throughout the United States, one of their major tactics to fight for better working conditions, higher wages, were strikes. Okay.